Skinwalkers. Are they more than just mythology? Please join me in welcoming my good friend Insomniak as we try to find out. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This started when my two brothers, David and Luke's girlfriend Sarah, all drove down to the desert to spend some time in the country. This is reservation land, as it were, so red dirt everywhere. We had some pistols and decided to go target practice. We took our gear and some old targets to this place called Devil's Heartbeat. I had never been before, but the three of them were familiar with the area. It was a canyon about 200 feet deep, and we stayed on one end of the canyon by the drop-offs, and to our left was a ravine. And about 50 feet over, the opposite side of the canyon rose up above us. On the opposite end, there were some Anasazi ruins. The Navajo may disagree with historians on the Anasazi's origins and departure, as according to the Navajo, they simply disappeared from existence, leaving behind plates, dishes, and food, and went into another dimension, or some equivalent. But whatever the history, the Navajo do not like to wander into Anasazi ruins. I never asked why, but figured it had something to do with disrespect or preserving history. As such, none of the others cared a bit about these canyon ruins. They were more interested in shooting pistols. I could see old beds, ladders, and even cave drawings on the cliffs with my naked eye. And I got this strange fixation going over me. I'm not Navajo, and felt that their rules didn't apply to me. I set off down the cliffs with a rope, and decided I would climb down, cross the canyon floor, and then climb back up. This was a bad idea for a million reasons, but it was like an obsession. I can't explain the feeling. It was like magnetism. I wanted to be in those ruins, and it wasn't just some touristy curiosity. I felt as if I were meant to go there. I kept slipping and getting stuck on the rocks. I was so frustrated I started crying. Finally, I was deterred by the unmistakable sound of a growl coming from the canyon floor below me. There were trees down there, so I couldn't see what was making the growl, but mountain lion immediately rose to mind, and I got my ass back up the cliffside. I said nothing to the others, and we shot the guns for a while. The only other strange occurrence was that while Sarah was aiming, things got eerily quiet. We all heard sounds from around us, behind us, maybe 20 feet away. It was like a growl, then a hoarse laugh, almost like a lion, and then a hyena. We had a clear view of the entire area, and there was nothing, certainly not on the cliff tops where we heard it anyway. The creepiest part was that while David, Sarah, and I all heard it from a close distance, Luke heard the exact same noise right by his ear. We ended up camping out to see if anything would happen, and this is when things got completely terrifying. Before, I was only scared of wild animals. We had guns though, and were sleeping with no bags nor tents. Just some blankets under the stars with a little fire. So I felt safe when we had all laid down, and I fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up a few hours later to see everyone else laying down with their eyes wide open, listening. The canyon was completely full of noises. The only way to describe it is people banging rocks together. There would be one set, maybe 300 yards away, then another clacking 200 yards away, and then 50 feet away. The canyon echoes, so it was hard to tell exactly how many rock smacking noises there were, but they sounded like Morse code. We listened for perhaps 10 minutes. No other animal noises. No nothing. Finally, David, who is a hard-ass and the least superstitious of his family, shouted, "Shut up!" And everything immediately stopped. My heart was in my throat. We just sat there and stared at each other wide-eyed. It was dead quiet. And then we heard another super weird set of noises from the Anasazi ruins. I don't know how to explain this one either, but it almost sounded like a zebra, and then the rock/stick/whatever started up again. But this was worse, because now other animal noises came in. We heard what sounded like wolves or coyotes barking, monkeys screeching, owls hooting, and those terrible zebra noises. We said nope. We got our happy little asses out of there immediately. It took us maybe 10 minutes to douse the fire, pack our blankets and speed away, with the noises continuing the entire time. That night, I was obviously pretty shaken. Before I could fall asleep again, my Navajo mother came and sat by me, and said that she could tell I had a rough day. We hadn't mentioned the creepy shit to avoid a lecture about messing around with the spirits. She asked me about it, and I ended up spilling my guts about not seeing the canyon ruins. It was something personal. I felt like I wanted to go there. Why couldn't I go? It would have been beautiful. After I word vomited all over her, I could see that she had a really concerned look over her face. "What is it?" I asked, totally confused, and she explained something I had no idea about. The spirits in the ruins like to lure people. When they get up to the ground, the spirits push them off. That's why we don't go there. I remained creeped out for the remainder of the visit. The town has a public accessible kiva, kind of like a tourist trap for little podunk places. But since I didn't see the ruins up close, I went down via the kiva, and I went alone, as of course my superstitious family refused to enter other natives' dwellings. I figured that nothing could push me off a cliff if I were in a kiva. I was right, but something even worse happened. Fast forward a few weeks later, I worked at a shitty call center in Salt Lake City, third shift. It was my first night alone, and I was feeling jumpier than ever since the kiva. My brothers already warned me that I had a Skinwalker following me, but I of course did not believe it. I don't smoke, but I follow my co-workers out for smoke breaks because I liked the chat. Tonight I lurked in the doorway because I had this horrible cloud of dread hanging over me. I was peeping out of the glass door, and being a total weirdo, it hit me then how paranoid I had been. That's what Skinwalkers do. They mess around with your mind. Whilst I was pacing in front of the glass door, I decided that this whole thing was stupid, and I was going to go outside and stand there for the rest of my 10-minute break. Most of the smokers were already filing back in, but I walked out, put my hands in my pockets and looked at the sky. I looked at the building, mentally patting myself on the back for not being a pussy. Then I saw something I will never be able to have a rational explanation for. We have 6 parking lots. In one of the lots far away from me, perhaps 100 feet away, I could see something walking. It was like a dog, obviously, but it was almost limping, and walked like it were tired or hurt. Animal lover me forgot about skinwalkers, and I started walking towards it, making the ch-ch-ch, come here doggy, noises, and then I stopped abruptly. The dog had the body form of a greyhound, and it was grey, but there was something really wrong with it. It had bloody legs and limped, but it walked more like a person would on their feet and hands. Its butt was moving to and fro, and didn't make any sense. When it heard me, it just stopped without turning, something I've never known any dog to do, and finally, it looked over its shoulder at me, And this is the freakiest part. The dog was looking at me the way a person does. It had huge eyes, way too big for a greyhound, and its teeth were barred as if it was considering biting me. Then it growled, but it was like a whistle growl, noises no regular animals make. It almost sounded like it wanted to talk to me, or that it was taunting me. Somehow in the middle of all of this, I realized it didn't have a tail, and I'd heard from all the Navajo stories that skinwalkers, when they appear as animals, don't have tails. Screw all logic and rationality. I turned and jetted. I didn't look back until I was inside the building and had pulled the door shut behind me. And when I looked back, of course, it was gone. When I described this to my brothers, they were absolutely sure it was a skinwalker. I then went through the trouble of blessing me, my apartment, them, and their apartments. I never saw the creepy bloody dog again, and have ever since never slightly wanted to visit those cliff ruins.
I'm an Eagle Scout, and my troop goes on what we call the High Adventure every year round at the start of summer. This past summer, we decided to go to Isle Royale, a little island to the east of Minnesota and north of Massachusetts. We're going to hike about 5 miles in and then come back after a few days of swimming and hiking. But someone on our ferry convinced my scout leaders to do the whole 35-mile hike around the island. Most of the guys in my group didn't want to do it. I especially didn't because I have a metal screw in my ankle, but we did it anyway. It was about 4 days of hiking, ranging from 6 to 10 miles a day. It was probably the most grueling thing that I've ever physically done, especially with the titanium in my foot. About 20 miles into our hike, we meet a guy named Bill. Now I really wish I had a photo of this guy. He was one of the most unique people I've ever met. But later that night, we talked more and more until he told us a story about something that happened to him and his group of kids while he was watching over the island. Now, the part of the island we're in at the moment was called Wendigo. Now the name alone scares the life out of me. Wendigo is supposed to be a mythical creature, and it's a cannibalic spirit that takes the physical form of a tall, lanky humanoid shape. It's supposed to mimic the sounds it hears, so footsteps, voices, etc. to lure people into the woods. Supposedly, this part of the island is inhabited with that very creature. Still freaks me out. So Bill told us that one night, with his group of 10 to 12-year-olds, who have never heard of this Wendigo, come to him saying one morning, "Bill, were you trying to scare us last night? We heard heavy footsteps around our tent and thought you were grunting at us and saying our names." Bill was really confused. He slept through the entire night. He didn't go out of his tent, and his tent was a decent distance away from his kids while being relatively close as to make sure they were okay. He knew for a fact though that he was sound asleep that night. He says that experience terrified him alone, especially when the exact same thing happened with a second group of kids who had never heard of the spirits of the island either. Then, he started hearing the voices of his kids outside his own tent. He told us that the Wendigo was real, and that we had to be very careful and to respect it. He told us about the origin of the creature and of the island and how it come to be known as a Wendigo. He was a firm believer that this creature was on that island with us. Even more so that it was nearby and that it would certainly have some kind of interaction with us, directly or non-directly. Now sleeping in an open cover tent that night was honestly the most scared I've ever been camping. I've camped far from society dozens and dozens of times. This is the worst, especially when you've got to pee really badly, but you're way too mortified to go into the deep dark woods alone to pee. You can't just pee next to your tent, and nobody is going to wake up to walk with you 20 feet into the woods during the dead of night. I think we're all just on high alert and strung out from hiking and stressed out, but every single twig that broke, animal that called out, every step we heard from animals near our tent made all of us jump. At one point, One of my guys freaked me out because he heard footsteps coming from far away and get like right behind us next to our tents. I didn't know about that. I'm certainly set into the hysteria of this, so I'm honestly grateful nothing happened to me personally to make me a firm believer of stuff like the Wendigo, but man, it felt like a horror movie all night. The other guys in my tent swore that they heard footsteps, noises, grunting sounds, etc., but I'm skeptical. They could have all just been enjoying the fear. The worst kind of fear is a fear that settles in deep and stays there. The kind that gives you anticipation and suspense and makes your body go into full fight or flight mode at a moment's notice. It was really freaky. I don't know if I believe Bill's story or if it's just a matter of coincidence, but I know that Bill believes Bill. I wish I could have spoken to him more about his experience, but he's a grown man, and it's the first grown man that I've ever seen kind of tear up with fear just talking about his close encounter. And the fact that nothing actually happened to him, why would you start tearing up in fear? I know the feeling. Yeah, I was a skeptic for sure, but I wouldn't like to say that I could disprove anything. To be honest, I'd kind of like to see what Bill was so terrified of. Maybe someday I will.
I frequently go bushwalking, all through the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, Australia, and have done so ever since I were a kid with my father. Sometimes for shorter walks I'd go alone. Yeah, that might be a bit dangerous. And as a woman, I could have the added risk of being attacked or whatever. But I carry a couple of knives with me and know how to use them, so I don't really feel threatened. And always bring a satellite phone. I just love and crave that feeling of being entirely surrounded by the bush. Anyway, around 5 years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to do an overnight walk by myself. Shit idea. The walk was fine. 3 or 4 groups of people came by my way on the first day. I picked a little area to stay in overnight towards dusk, cut a few ferns back, and I had a space to stick my one-person tent. It was maybe 30 meters from the track, mostly out of sight behind the trees and such. The usual wildlife noises were going on as I drifted to sleep. Though there were strange noises, I can only describe it as a bounding sound, like someone was sprinting through the bush right past me. But it went by way too fast, with too few steps to carry a person that distance. Also, if you've ever seen the bush part in Australia, you'd know that there isn't much space on the ground to walk freely if you're off the track. You have to at least wade through the ferns and bushes, so you can't really sprint full speed without eating shit. I felt a bit uneasy. I thought it was probably just stuff falling from a tree or whatever. Next morning I got up, had my breakfast, packed my things, and kept going along the track. I passed a couple of people going the other way. Then, I was alone again for perhaps an hour and a half, and I heard the sound of a stick being broken. The sound came from behind me and to my left, away from the track. I turned around to look, and nearly died on my feet. A fair distance into the bush, there was something standing there and looking directly at me. I wanted to believe a person, but it wasn't. I can't judge the exact height, but it was obviously very tall. I'd say at least 9 feet. Its skin was dark grey or brownish. It had a horrifically large head with these big black eyes. I couldn't see its mouth or anything. Its arms and legs were really long. I was almost crying. Tears welled up in my eyes and I was completely frozen staring at this creature. It was like my legs were locked in position. The longer the stare went on between the creature and I, the longer the feeling of absolute dread prevailed over me. like nothing I'd ever felt before. The fear built up until I could feel my heart in my throat, and then I bolted. I sprinted away, continuing on the track. I ran and was too scared to look behind me. Tears were streaming from my eyes and I was running away. I couldn't stop until I caught up with some people going in the same direction as me. They looked at me saying, "Oh my God, are you alright?" I was absolutely exhausted, running so hard for so long. I told them I saw something in the bush and asked if I could walk with them the rest of the way. It took me 6 months, but I did start bushwalking again. But I never go alone these days. You couldn't pay me.
Now let me start by saying that, having spent my entire life living in New Mexico, a lot of people I know have claimed to have seen a Skinwalker. They're kind of our regional boogeymen, but ask a Navajo about them, and they'll either absolutely ignore the question and all the following, or they will kind of laugh it off saying that, well, white people believe any old myth. Well, here's my story regarding them. My father owns a small delivery service that operates out of Farmington, MN. We mostly deliver small packages out to the middle of nowhere, as are much too hassle for the larger delivery companies to bother with. Now my dad is the only employee at the company and we have a few pickup trucks and a trailer. So one day, we get a delivery out to Window Rock AZ on the Navajo reservation about 2 hours from Farmington. Now my dad gets a call for the job while he's chilling with one of his Navajo friends, Travis and his girlfriend. Travis mentions how he's got family in Window Rock and that he hasn't seen them in ages and suggests they go with him. It was about 6 or 7 at the time and it was a summeriest day, so my dad decides to go with him. He can do so in his delivery truck really quick. Then while Travis sees his family, we can go check out the Window Rock. It's actually a big rock face with a large hole in the middle that goes through to the other side. It's pretty cool. Now we had to convoy in separate trucks since my dad's was loaded down with freight. We decided to bring along some walkie-talkies so we could communicate with one another. So we spend our time in Window Rock and everything is generally uneventful. We then start heading home along the old highway with my dad and I in front, Travis and his girlfriend in the truck behind us. I honestly don't remember most of the Window Rock trip, but this is a part that I will never forget. We're somewhere on the highway between Window Rock and Gallup MN, and it just began raining the day earlier and the roads were kind of slick, so we're taking it pretty slowly. On the left of the highway, there's nothing but sandstone cliffs. On the right, there is a huge field separate from the road by a small barbed wire fence. We crest to the top of this hill, and down at the bottom of the hill, we see what appears to be a very large dog. It's sitting back and it kind of hunches in the middle of the road facing the cliffs. My dad calls over the radio, "Hey Travis, you see that big ass dog?" Travis starts yelling back over the radio, "That's not a dog, speed up right now and hit it." He almost sounds hysterical. He just keeps screaming, "Hit it, JJ, you've got to hit it, please, hit that fucking thing right now." So my dad starts to speed up. As we get a bit closer, I can then begin to see it a little more clearly. It's absolutely covered in this brown wiry matted hair that appears to have dried blood all over it. It's still facing the cliffs, but the moment our headlights hit it, it turns around and looks right at us. Its face. I don't know how else to describe it other than a mix between a bear and a human's face. It looks so twisted and distorted, almost in pain. As we get closer to this thing, we start to realise it's actually fucking huge. It's still sitting on this weird hunch and it's about shoulder height with the hood of the truck. We get literally inches from hitting it and it lets out this horrible scream that sounds like somebody's lungs were filled with water. It then leaps backwards towards the field, just landing on the other side of the barbed wire fence. Then with another leap, it goes out of sight. Travis comes over the radio again. "Holy shit, keep driving, we have to get out of there, go faster." He kept repeating the last part. We get out of here and we have to go faster. Pretty soon, We are at a crazy speed and we just start to come near the outskirts of Gallup and we get pulled over. Travis pulls his truck over with us. Naturally, this makes the cop, a Navajo man himself, very on edge, and he immediately asks why Travis felt the need to be pulled over at the same time. Travis then says to the guy, "Look, we just saw a Skinwalker a few miles back, it's been following us." The officer immediately turns white, stammers something about a verbal warning, gets into his car and takes off. We then do the same.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I would like to extend a huge thank you to Insomniak for his help in today's video. But you aren't even close to being done. We have even more stories ready for you over on his channel. So click the link on screen now or in the description to follow us over. Would you guys be interested in a Skinwalker compilation video? Please, drop a comment if you'd like one in the near future. And smash that like button for good measure. Right before you subscribe, of course. I'll see you over with Insomniak.